Why should we cherish objectivity as if ideas were innocent, as if they don't serve one interest or another? Surely we want to be objective if that means telling the truth as we see it, not concealing information that may be embarrassing to our point of view. But we don't want to be objective if it means pretending that ideas don't play a part in the social struggle of our time, and that we don't take sides in those struggles. Indeed, it is impossible to be neutral. In a world already moving in certain directions where wealth and power are already distributed in certain ways, neutrality means accepting the way things are now. It is a world of clashing interests, war against peace, nationalism against internationalism, equality against greed, and democracy against elitism. And it seems to me both impossible and undesirable to be neutral in those conflicts. And that quote comes from Howard Zinn. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Igan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Well, indeed, folks, in a world such as we see before us today, Mr. Zinn was absolutely correct in his statement that it is truly impossible to be neutral in the face of such situations. Well, it is impossible for anybody who is able to think clearly anyway. It's impossible in the mind of anybody who is able to step back and take in the entire picture of our world holistically. Because the uncomfortable reality is that to remain neutral in the face of oppression is to side with the oppressor. Because if you see oppression around you in the world, or if you witness oppression in front of you, and you do remain neutral in the face of it, then all your neutrality will do is to ensure the continued oppression of the victim, and to virtually grant the perpetrator an open slather to do whatever they like. And it is precisely this attitude of neutrality that has created much of the situation we see around us in the world today. It's people's attitudes of saying, look, what can I do? I'm just a little person. I don't really want to get involved. I'm just neutral in the face of all this. Let them work it out between them. And indeed, folks, this type of attitude has been responsible for the decimation of entire countries and entire civilizations. You see, the uncomfortable truth is that people tend to point the finger at others when they see a problem. They like to believe that someone else is in charge and someone else is to blame for all of the things that we see around us, when very often these situations have in fact been created by the personal neutrality of the people within the society. And as uncomfortable and disturbing as it may be to admit it, folks, what we find if we really look is that all of the problems that we face are due to our own inaction and our own failure to face reality around us and to make a stand to improve reality, to leave the world a little bit better than how we found it. Too often we remain silent in the face of oppression. Too often we remain silent in the face of legislation which causes harm to others. Too often we remain silent in the face of the destruction of our environment that we see around us. Too often we fail to question the actions of our governments. People often adopt the attitude that, hey, I'm just a little person, what can I do? What can one man do? But really, folks, all the problems that we face have all been carried out ultimately by little people, just the same as you. They may be part of a big organization or a large body of people, but ultimately, when taken as individuals, they are just little people with no more and no less power than anybody else. And one of our big problems is that we have relinquished the power that we have to these individuals because we've been trained to do so. We've been trained to believe that we must obey the dictates of others, even when those dictates do not have our best interests at heart, even when those dictates result in the destruction of our environment, the poverty that we see in the world, and the ultimate discarding of people within society in order to support an economic system. We see all of this and still we remain compliant because we believe that we are just little people and there's nothing that we can do. And when we do respond to the many problems that we see around us, we respond in a compartmentalized fashion. We may see something like poverty or something like the whaling or the coal seam gas mining, and we will only focus on that one little symptom, that one little issue. And this happens because we fail to step back to see the bigger problem and the bigger issue. We fail to take into account what caused the coal seam gas mining, what caused the whaling, what caused the poverty. And really what caused it is the system itself. And don't get me wrong here, folks. I mean, in regard to issues such as coal seam gas mining or whaling, we absolutely do need people on the ground, or in the ocean, as it were, to hold the front line for us, to prevent this from going any further forward than what it is, and to stop it right there at the fence and remain on the front line. But we also need the same group and the same organisation to be addressing the actual root cause of the problem. Because the root cause of the problem is the system that allowed the problem to exist in the first place. Because it's always the system that actually created the problem. It's the inherent corruption within the system that creates the problem. And this system remains in place because of our compliance to the system, and very often due to our personal neutrality in the face of corruption, in the face of injustice. We just turn away and we say, what can I do? I prefer not to get involved. And so we see the world that we currently have. And so you see, folks, though the problem does lie with the system, ultimately the problem lies with us. It lies with the perspective we have of reality and our failure to stand in our power and to stop being subservient to a system that is corrupt as the one that enslaves us, because it is corrupt, folks. And of course, very often the corruption is there because of people who work within the system, because of the perspective that they have. Because very often what you find is that the perspective of the people who work within the system is one of subservience and compliance. These people simply say, well, what choice do I have? I have to do what I'm told because I'm working within these parameters. But it's kind of a pyramid thing anyway, folks. I mean, even if the person at the top does give you orders, it's up to you whether you comply with those orders. And even if the top person gives the second in charge some orders, and then the second in charge gives them to the manager, and then the manager gives them to the people below him, it all comes down to the compliance of the people, always. And it's the compliance of the people right down through the pyramid structure. But it has to stop at some stage, folks, and really all it would take for it to stop and for all this corruption to simply dissipate would be for people to stop complying with anything that contravenes natural law. And of course, there are some systems that work quite fine, folks. I mean, you've really got to put things in perspective. I mean, we need to have systems where people work within the parameters of the system in order for the system to work. I mean, if you've got a supermarket or you've got a mechanics business or whatever you've got, obviously you need people to perform specific actions. But when the actions that the individuals are performing are unjust, and they know that they are unjust, and they know that they are leading to greater harm down the track, then the individuals within these organisations do have a moral obligation to act, and they have a moral obligation to disobey the mandates that are given to them by the organisations within which they work. And of course, folks, I'm just using the analogy of the supermarket and the mechanics business to say, yes, we have to have structured businesses, but when I say people are doing damage, I'm saying that this is in the other organisations, in government organisations, in corporate organisations, in banking institutions, and even in scientific institutions and organisations and think tanks. And folks, it's very difficult to blame a lot of the people within some of these organisations because they are very compartmentalised. You'll get people in university that are working on one particular experiment with a particular virus or whatever, perhaps trying to break down and code the DNA of a particular virus or something like that, and you'll have another organisation that is working out how to multiply molecules or something. And neither of these organizations know about the other research that's going on. And you'll find that, okay, if you get that DNA code and you can get this other work that's been done on manipulating these genes or multiplying these molecules, and you mix it together, then it leads somewhere else that neither of these people know about. So it's all very compartmentalized. But what you find is that all of these think tanks and all of these university experiments and all these things are all funded by the same people at the top. They're the ones who get all the information, and then they put it all together in their own labs and they work out some very, very devious things with it. And that's the way it all goes. It's like when you build a weapon of war. I mean, you'll find that most states in America are involved in the manufacture of weapons. And it might be something as simple as a factory that makes washers, or a factory that makes nuts and bolts, or another factory that makes steel plates, or another factory that makes piping. I mean, none of these factories and none of these industries seem like they're involved in weapon manufacture, but what you'll find is that if you're building something like a tank, you're going to find a piece of that tank made in almost every state in America. And that keeps the people within the state in work. And they might be people who are completely against the war machine and don't want to know about weapons, don't want to know about going to Iraq, want peace. But again, they have to pay to be alive, and so they need a job. So they go to their factory and they make washers. They don't really have any idea that those washers are being used to hold bolts together on tanks that are going over to Iraq and killing people. But if you stop the manufacture of the tank, and you stop the manufacture of the weapons of war, you find huge factories in every single state in America suddenly are closed down, and you have all of these people who lose their jobs. You have mass protests, you have all sorts of depression and compression of society because all of these people are suddenly out of work, and that's no good because they have to pay to be alive, so they want the factory to reopen. As much as they don't want the war in Iraq to continue, they want the factory to be open so they can still make their washers because they need to pay to be alive. But they never think, well, hang on a minute, why do I have to pay to be alive? Why am I forced to work in an industry that is contributing to the death of millions and millions of people in order to support my life? Well, the only reason that I have to do this is because I don't have community around me, because I don't have time for community. I don't have time to get to know my neighbours. I don't have time to put in a garden and to have town meetings and expand my mind, because I've got to be on the treadmill because I need to collect paper in order to pay to be alive. They never stop and just look at it and just think about it. I really believe, if people could just stop work for 5 minutes and step back and just look, very often you'd find a light bulb going off in these people's minds, and they'd realise how ridiculous the system is and how enslaved the general population is to this system. And this system is a very destructive system. And it's due to the destructive nature and the psychopathic nature of the system that we find all the problems that we see in the world. And yet we work to support this system when the actual fact is that the most expendable thing within its parameters is the human race, and most especially the workers within the system. Because these workers are discarded all the time. The more the system makes itself more efficient, the more people are discarded. It really is remarkable, isn't it, folks? I mean, when you step back and look at it, most people working within big organizations are always working to streamline the running of the organization and to make it more efficient. So basically what they're working towards is their own redundancy, and they are working towards a point where they become expendable and are discarded. In most cases anyway. I mean, in the administration hierarchy, that's the way it works anyway. Of course, you're always going to need workers to make the washers and operate the machinery and stuff like that, although things are getting very automated. But it is rather amazing that we work so hard to support a system which sees us as ultimately being the most expendable thing within its parameters. It's very clever the way it's been put together.